I wanted to take a few minutes today, not very long. I think we'll probably end before the class hour is up today. I know you may have questions. I ask you to come in with questions today. But I wanted to go back over what I hope the course has accomplished, what I hope you will come away from the course having as a kind of permanent possession in some sense. We all take courses or read things, and 6 months later we don't remember everything. We don't remember all the facts or all the data. We would be an odd person perhaps if we did. We would have a photographic memory. So what is the value of taking a course in which you know that at some future point a lot of it will, in essence, have been drained away? So I wanted to mention some of the things that I hope will stay with you. That you have become a better writer and a better speaker, that you write and speak with greater clarity, with more self-confidence, with less hesitation, that you have a greater resourcefulness and confidence when it comes to the use of language and the invention of arguments, that your style is improving, and that it will continue to improve because you've become self-conscious about it in a good way. You are concerned about the impression your writing makes, not just from the standpoint of content or whether you know things, but from the standpoint of whether the writing is appealing in a way that might be called aesthetic or compelling or interesting, that it attracts a reader, that you are also persuasive. Because in part you've thought about as many angles of the question as you can, and that you have therefore been able to think about any opposition that might be mustered against you. This means, in a sense, too, the course has been aimed at making better thinkers. Better language almost always creates better thought. Imprecise language is a result of imprecise or muddled thought. We talked about how slippery and difficult language is, the choice of vocabulary, the shades of meaning in the individual words, the fact that English has an almost infinite number of possible arrangements in syntax and grammar. It's not a highly rigid language in its formulation. So critical thinking and critical writing go together. You should be able to analyze things that you hear and read more sharply, maybe with a little greater degree of suspicion. That's fine. Maybe with a little greater degree of admiration for the skill with which something has been composed. Doesn't mean you necessarily agree with the argument that it is peddling, but you might think it's a very good effort to do it. You should also have become a better listener. We are filled with distraction in our lives today. It's one of the reasons I ask you all, and you've been very good about keeping your devices off during this class. We multitask at a furious rate. We read, and then we read something else, and then we realize we have to look up this, and then we click on that, and then someone calls us up, and then we have a message, and next thing you know, we've forgotten the first thing we wanted to do. And the most important thing we were set to do when we sat down to do it doesn't get done, and as we get up or as we continue walking, we realize we hadn't done it. We become distracted. The course should encourage a kind of concentration, which is important to form the mind. We live connected lives, and we're going to have to, and we should. They're an advantage. But we have to learn how to control them. If we don't control it, it will end up controlling us. It will be an addiction. There's nice people at the Media Lab and MIT discovered some time ago that the same kind of excitement people get from turning to their devices many times a day lights up the same region of the brain that lights up in people who are addicted to cocaine. Gives you a little rush. You've got to do it. Now you do it, now you're secure. So somehow or other, that marvelous beast which gives us so much, we have to learn to control. But it also means learning to listen to other people. Learning to listen without tuning out or turning off. Giving a fair hearing. That's sometimes very hard. Human beings, all of us, have prejudices of various kinds. And when we are presented with something that we initially don't like or whose appearance to us is initially displeasing, our tendency is to reject. Our natural tendency is not to let ourselves open, but to close down. So I hope the course has encouraged you with part of the idea behind a liberal education in language is that you can listen to someone without getting so angry that you yourself become speechless. That you have some articulate response based on having listened carefully to what someone has said. This means as a corollary, meaning as a logical follow-on, the ability to deal with diversity of opinion and principle and background. Rhetoric is key for that because it means opening yourself up to those opinions. Not that you must in the end agree with them, because you can't agree with all of them. That would be impossible. They're too diverse. But that you examine them in a disinterested and dispassionate way for a long enough period of time to give them a fair hearing. Ultimately, what the Greek rhetoricians and others often thought this study gave you was a term I used once or twice in the term. There's no reason you should remember it, but the Greeks called it phronesis. Practical wisdom, knowledge, the ability to make good judgments, the ability to size up someone's character, the ability to see what motivations might be. Now, a judge in a legal court has judgment, not quite the same as phronesis, because that judge has to follow the law in many ways, as do the lawyers in the court. So phronesis is a little more expansive. It goes beyond simple legal definitions of judgment. It means a wider wisdom and also a wider acquaintance. You remember how Frederick Douglass called on so many of the arts and sciences in his address? And he called on music, he called on technology, he called on globalization, he called on religion, he called on history. He called on so many of the arts and sciences. And that expansiveness gives one an ability better to judge the world and better to solve problems. Because the problems we face that are really hard problems are the problems that do not admit of any one discipline solving them. If chemistry could simply solve a problem, we give it to the chemists to solve it. If architects could simply solve the problem of climate change in architecture, we just tell the architects to do it. If people who are in data analysis could solve all the problems of traffic circulation, we'd say, well, just do it. Now, sometimes those problems are amenable to solution by one field only, and then that field will solve it. But I would suggest that really difficult problems that society and nations face cannot simply be solved by one discipline or one form of knowledge. How are you going to solve issues of race relations? That's a hard one. Probably need to know some history. Maybe some anthropology or biology wouldn't be so bad. Cultural studies. All kinds of things might come into law. All kinds of things might come in. How are you going to address a problem such as climate disruption? Well, you might need law, you might need international agreements, you might need economics, you might need culture and the arts, you might need all of those things. Who will be the person to get those individuals who are specialists to integrate their knowledge in order to address those problems that must be addressed by multiple disciplines? It might be a specialist in one of them, but if it is, it's got to be a specialist who has the persuasive and communicative ability to get people to work together toward a common goal to solve these virtually intractable issues. That's leadership. And that leadership comes with an ability to write well, to speak well. It comes with phronesis. It comes with an ability to listen to people. And it comes with an ability to deal with diverse points of view. It's a tall order. It's hard. The course, I hope, has presented an appreciation of and perhaps an increased knowledge of issues in United States social, political, and cultural history, and how language has been instrumental in addressing those issues. Not the only thing that has addressed them, but instrumental in addressing them and resolving them. And the fact that many of those issues in one form or another remain. They may have changed, they may have been partially addressed, real progress may have been accomplished, but many of these same issues remain. The issue of inequality in this country. Certainly that is an issue that remains. The issue of race is an issue that remains. The issue of workers' rights, the issue of women's rights, they all remain. The issue of how one gets the nation to think of itself as a nation of common citizens and not as two or more polarized parties screaming at one another. That's another issue. And that's an issue which has come to the fore particularly in the last decade or two. If you have been recently watching a little bit of the news coverage of the death of the first President Bush, you will have heard that many of the commentators have remarked that that was a time, late last century, 1970s, 80s, 90s, and even later, when it was possible for people who had been mortal political enemies to come together and accomplish something and solve some problems by compromise. And that is true. In fact, after President Clinton left office, he and President Bush became extraordinarily good friends. Clinton was a man who beat Bush in 1992, making him a one-term president only. By 2004-05, they had joined hands to address very hard problems, one of which was the absolute devastation caused by the tsunami in the rim of the Indian Ocean. I don't know if you are aware of that, but hundreds of thousands of people perished in that tsunami. It destroyed many settlements. Damage was terrible in many countries. And one of the initiatives to address that catastrophe was led by Presidents Bush and Clinton, who did it together, putting aside all of the past rancor. We have mentioned in the course from time to time the ethical dimension of rhetoric. It's possible to study the subject without that. Believe me, it's been done. And people can become good writers and they become good speakers in the sense of persuasive without thinking too much in terms of ethical self-examination. I don't think that's the way to learn the subject. I don't think it's the way to carry it forward. That means, to some degree, your awareness of your own power as an agent speaking and writing who can convince people of things, and also an awareness of the ethical positions that other people hold. Integrity of character, sincerity. It's the great rule of sincerity that Lincoln followed, that John Quincy Adams invokes, means, to me, not duplicity, not cynicism. Doesn't mean you can't be complicated in your thinking, but to be a person of integrity and to be sincere is a hard thing. Does it mean you can't change your mind? No, it doesn't mean that either. You can change your mind. Matter of fact, it's pretty horrifying to see someone who never changes their mind in their lifetime. They're like a statue that gets cast at age 20. And they're like this. If you think at 45 what you think at 20, well, I don't know what's been going on in the world. How have you changed? Presumably, we should change to some degree if we're maturing. But that ethical care is something that is especially important in rhetoric because it is possible to use language to pull the wool over people's eyes. It's possible to fool them. It's possible to mislead them. It's possible to tell them lies. It's possible to play them. So that also leads into some of the themes we've looked at in what I would call citizenship. And I don't just mean of this country. I mean being a citizen of whatever country you are a citizen of. Some of you may hold dual citizenship. Some of you may not be citizens of the United States. But it also means being a citizen of the world. That's a very old phrase. And what does that mean? It means being aware of global issues, being aware that human beings are now so interconnected that one thing happening one place is very likely to connect to other things happening in other places. That citizenship can sometimes come with leadership as well. My thought is that if an institution or a school or an entire culture is not educating good writers and good speakers, it's not educating leaders. Because leaders have to be good speakers and good writers at some level. And very often, if they are very good speakers and very good writers, it boosts their capacity to be leaders. I mentioned to you that David Gergen, who's advised a number of presidents and taught in the communications wing at the Kennedy School, once listed the presidents who came to Harvard, and he drew up two lists, and one were the ones who got good grades, really good grades, and the other were the ones who were really good communicators. And they'd all been presidents, and in general, the one who were very good communicators ended up having a higher historical rank as presidents than the one who simply were able to turn out a lot of great grades. That doesn't mean you shouldn't strive for good grades. But what it does mean is that those skills of communication, persuasion, and knowledge, which are not bound to performance in a single course, but are the development of your own awareness over time, become increasingly important as you grow older, because you're no longer in an academic environment. And that means internalizing them, owning them, making them part of you. I've said a number of times in the course, you've got to end up being your own toughest editor, your own harshest critic. That's not an easy thing to do. It really isn't. But if you internalize that attitude, you're going to move light years faster than others who are defensive about their work. That internalization will permit you to reflect, to self-correct, to reject what no longer is good in your writing and speaking and thinking, and to inject constantly a higher standard. There's always a higher standard to aim for. Writers can and do get better as they age. They do. Also, one more thing I would mention as part of the aims of the course is a sense of audience. Don't forget you're writing and speaking to people, to a group, to a community. And knowing that community and establishing some sort of solidarity, even if the community is potentially split or riven, is important. It sometimes is as simple as a joke or a phrase or something in common, and that makes a connection. And that connection, that sense of community is important, because we can't just say we're a community. That doesn't do it. It has to be a more active sense of belonging to a common purpose or a common set of values or goals. I happen to think that that sense of community is particularly important and particularly difficult in any kind of democracy. Everybody gets to say something. I was at a town meeting last night in my town of Acton. It was an interesting town meeting. We were voting to see whether we would sell, manufacture, and grow marijuana in the town of Acton. Is it legal to do that in Massachusetts? Well, yes and no. Towns, it turns out, can decide whether they want to have it in their own town or not. Well, we had a very interesting long debate. I won't go into details, but I will only say it was messy. It was hard. Some people didn't quite understand the question. Some people thought that having the sale of marijuana in the town would get a lot of extra tax revenue. Someone else pointed out it would be 0.1% of the town's budget. Someone else pointed out that people needed it for medical reasons. Another person pointed out that there was already going to be a medical marijuana dispensary. Then someone else pointed out that medical marijuana cost a lot more than regular marijuana sold at an outlet. And something I didn't know, the claim was made, you had to spend $250 a year to keep up a medical marijuana card that permitted you to get a prescription for it. I don't know whether that's accurate or not. A lot of things were said at this town meeting. Then we voted by clickers. There was a problem with the clickers. Yes. We took a trial vote. Will the Patriots go to the Super Bowl? 76% said yes, 24% said no. Then we went to the first ballot question. We voted on the first ballot question. 76% said yes, 24% said no. Now you can imagine what that caused in the audience. Someone got up and said, I move to reconsider the question because it is suspicious that the trial vote came out exactly the same as the vote on the first question. You might think that, right? So then there was a motion to reconsider the first question. And we had to go through that motion. Then there was a motion to close off debate. And we had to go through that motion, each time voting with these clickers. I thought it was quite a wonderful thing. But I was exhausted at the end of the day. It was pushing on 9 o'clock at night. But here's the marvelous thing. Here were about 1,300 residents of a town going to a meeting to make a decision about their town and discussing it according to rules of order, and doing so in a way that was more or less effective rhetorically. Those who spoke well had an advantage. Those who didn't lost the advantage. It was democracy in action. It was messy, it was at times boring, it was at times comic. But it was the thing to do. It was quite wonderful to see in action. I wouldn't want to have to do it every week, but you don't have to do it every week. This kind of deliberation in a democracy is particularly difficult and frustrating. And you will at one time or another, as you enter into clubs, organizations, perhaps some kind of political effort, some kind of crusade in your community to do something or prevent something from being done, you'll find out how messy and frustrating it is, which means you have to put in the time and the patience. But I think it is a glorious thing. I think it's much better than walking into an auditorium and having 4 or 5 people up on the stage tell you what is going to be done. Those are some of the themes in the course and some of the things I hope the course has accomplished for you and that you'll keep with you.